Unfortunately, when you're speaking up, the judges' table's not the place to speak up because the person who's usually speaking the most at judges' table is probably going home.
Sara Hauman joined us in the virtual walk-in to spill the hot goss on being a contestant on Top Chef Season 18. She also talked about the trials and tribulations of starting a business mid-pandemic and how to transition out of a role as head chef into a full-time entrepreneur.
I would want to have a boutique cannery. It's really weird.
On Top Chef, she earned her place not only with her incredible skills and quick thinking, but also by being one of the most cheerful and hilarious chefs we'd seen in many seasons.
Mother yogurt!
Here's the interview.
It's fantastic to get to talk to you. Your season and you were like this shining light that was like so enjoyable to watch.
That's so nice, especially on a very stressful day.
I am absolutely a huge fan. I'm a huge fan of Amar too, which I was totally shocked that he was like a guest judge the whole season too.
Oh, you got to catch I think season 20, the World All Stars he was on. So.
Yes. I am too familiar with season 20.
Oh, okay.
I can't believe that you guys do what you do, first of all I do is crack jokes about that show, and I'm exhausted at the end of the season.
It is. It's actually more physically taxing.
I cannot imagine. Before we get into that bullshit, I want to talk about sort of your life before the show, and then I want to kind of segue into what you're doing now. Because I find all of it really fascinating. I know that I know some bullet points, but like if you could just give me like sort of a quick just rundown of where you come from and how you became the chef that you are.
Sure. So I did most of my professional cooking in San Francisco, and then I realized that I really did want to one day kind of own my own business, and pre-pandemic, San Francisco's still expensive. It's still the Bay Area, but pre-pandemic it was pretty hard, and it priced a lot of people out. And I think for me, the smart decision was to put myself in a location where I could potentially have my own business, whatever that business might be, and be okay with maybe not making a substantial amount of money or being able to side hustle. So I decided to kind of move up to the Pacific Northwest. I did think about doing, my fish project, whatever my fish project was at the time. And then when I got up to the Pacific Northwest, of course, I still had to find my footing and figure it out. So I got up there and I got a job at a restaurant, and quite honestly, in my interview for that restaurant, I said, I literally am burnt out. I don't want to be a chef anymore. I want to learn about the business side of things. They still hired me for whatever reason. I tried to sabotage it. They hired me for whatever reason, but it just wasn't, I laid out what I wanted from that job. I thought, okay, well, maybe if I work during the day, I wasn't working Monday through Friday, but at least I had a daytime job, and the commute was fine. I don't mind driving. And, I worked in a very beautiful place on a farm. But again, there was just kind of still something very much missing. And I think some of it was professional, absolutely. Some of it was personal. My personal life wasn't going that great either. So it was kind of like I didn't really want to do food anymore. And Top Chef had actually been they reached out to me to be on the show when I was still living and working in San Francisco. So they just kept calling me. And I'm like, no. And then finally, I kind of reached my breaking point of if I go on this show, honestly, I thought I was going to do really bad. So I was like, let me just go on this show and get it over with. And then, I had this whole plan where I was going to come back and delete my social media, and then basically use the winter time when it's really, really slow at the winery to go back to school for something, anything. Didn't matter. Literally didn't matter. I would sell cars. I don't care. Just didn't want to be around food anymore because it wasn't bringing me any joy. And yeah, so then I went on the show, but I didn't actually do that bad.
I mean, this is amazing. So, I mean, you basically said, I'll be on Top Chef if you stop calling me.
Well, yeah, it was for me, it was the right time. It was every time I got asked to be on the show, I was like, there's no way I can leave a restaurant for 6 weeks. There's no way I can pay my rent, without making money for 6 weeks while I'm gone on this silly TV show that's not going to pay me. I don't, I just, and I also, like, there's a nerve thing that goes on with it. I was kind of like, do people watch this show anymore? I don't even know. I guess I didn't think about the positive side of what could happen. I was just kind of thinking of the negative outcomes that could happen. And then when I finally decided to go on after being cast, it was one, I had the time. We were in pandemic. I was at the winery. They weren't gonna lay me off. I was doing, it was a chill moment in my life. And so I felt like, okay, I can leave this job for 8 weeks and it's gonna be fine. It's in the middle of nowhere, Oregon. It's not like a Michelin star restaurant that I'm leaving. So I just decided to do it, but I did decide to do it with kind of like very little expectations.
Walk me through like some of the possible negative outcomes of being on the show. What were you worried about doing it?
I think it was just about the usual. You go on and you're like, I've spent, at that point I'm like, I've spent 18 years of my life doing this. And to go onto a show and then be, look like an idiot, look like you don't know what you're doing, and be voted off very early. It's definitely, it's an ego thing for sure. Obviously it's very difficult, and I'm sure no one thinks of it like that, and I'm overthinking everything per usual. But it is really, really hard. I think even on our season, I know that there were some people who kind of went out a little early, and they're not necessarily in the food industry hard anymore, and I think the pandemic was a time when a lot of people were kind of going through what's really important to them, and it was just kind of a difficult time. It was, what am I doing? And I think for me, the what am I doing question would be answered by just going on the show. And if I failed, then, like I said, I had this plan of like how I was gonna care for myself after failing and basically, just essentially retreat and go do something else and try something else. But it is really hard when you dedicate your life to something, and then you go onto a show, and of course it's entertainment at the end of the day. They're not trying to make it easy, and someone does have to go home first. But it's definitely hard when you've put so much time into something, and then you're on a show and you like slice your finger, because you're nervous and the time's going, and you're like, I swear I know what I'm doing, everyone. It's just it's definitely a hard position to put yourself in, but I guess ignorance is bliss in my case, because I just kind of did it.
There are moments when you just know what the best thing to do is. You're like, absolutely, I'm going to do this. No, don't do that. No, that's too salty. No, this is too. And you had a couple of those moments, and I wanted to ask you, like, what was your strategy for those moments when you absolutely knew what was the right thing to do, and then those moments when you're like, I'm not really sure what I'm cooking right now? How did you work yourself through those moments?
It's hard because what I think a lot of viewers don't take into consideration is, generally speaking, if you you're in your kitchen and you're like, okay, you make something and it doesn't turn out well, you go to the walk-in refrigerator and you get some more stuff and you make it. But when you're on the show, you purchase what you have, and so you don't really have that like plan B. So a lot of it was figuring out the game side of everything, and purchasing yourself some plan Bs, for sure. I know there were several times, on the show where it was like, Tom saying, you don't just don't cook the worst dish, you know? So that's definitely a strategy as well, is like, don't, just make sure it's like barely good enough. You know, for me, I think a lot of it was I was just tasting constantly, and so I'm just second guessing myself the whole time, and I would try to have other people taste it, but I never really thought that it was like a sabotage thing. They were going to tell me if it tasted bad, but I know that for me during competition, when people came up to me and said, "Hey, will you taste this?" I would quite honestly be like, "I'm sorry, but no," because I'm not going to give you honest feedback, because I literally, I can't even think straight right now. So for me, you know, I don't know. I told myself going on the show, like, don't do anything you haven't done before, and don't do anything, you know, you don't have time for. And then that just went out the window. And I think it's because, you know, again, I don't, people are like, "Man, you're so creative." And I never thought that I was super creative with food. I just thought that I did normal things.
The dish is quirky, and I think that's when you're at your best.
Yeah, I know. I have to embrace the weird.
So for me, it was really recognizing after the fact, like, oh, okay, maybe I do think about things like a little bit differently than other people. Maybe I do put flavors together in a little bit of a different way. That's possibly hard to, you know, articulate to other people, but when I do get in the kitchen, like, I can just, it's like an intuitive cooking situation, you know. I think, you know, for instance, during Restaurant Wars, you know, everyone was like, "Oh my God, Dawn didn't tell you what she was making." And like,
Dawn, what are your finalized dishes?
I will tell you in a little bit.
She has a very difficult time communicating with the rest of the team how her dishes would fill into the progression of the meal.
There is no connection between the first dish and this dish at all.
yeah, that made it very difficult, but I understand that feeling of like, you're trying to figure it out as you go. And, you know, if something doesn't work out, then you just, like, you gotta just keep moving, basically.
Everything is great. Everything is great. Everything is great. I don't know if this is a great idea. This flatbread is gonna be my starch element. Oh, mother of God.
And figure out what you're gonna make out of the mess you made. So
Sure.
I guess a lot of it is pretty much like just figuring out how to put a Band-Aid on your mess ups.
How did you attack moments when there was, you know, there was a lot of times. First of all, one of my favorite things was during the drive-in. Your joke about it being White Castle was way more fucking funny than chicken wings.
The White Castle is pretty funny.
And I think I threw my notepad across the room.
Let's come up with something and I'll just make it.
I like chicken wing.
Like, when you come across a strong personality, it's a room full of strong personalities, but you know, sometimes the strongest voice gets heard, and in many ways it's not always the best thing to do.
It's true. I mean, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you. I barely watched any of the episodes. I can't, even the ones I did good on, I was like, whoa, this is the worst. So was my White Castle comment to Gabriel, was I being sassy to him?
Yeah, so there was 6 courses, and the first course was supposed to reflect comedy movies, and you were like, you know, what'd be funny is White Castle. Yeah, and he was like, how about Funny Bone? It was so dumb. It's like, all I could hear in my back of my mind was someone yelling, "Not funny."
Not funny!
You know, for me, I think part of being on the show was finding a voice. I always just, I never wanted to be a chef. I liked being a sous chef. I liked just cooking. I still don't, like, honestly, the idea of quite, like, having a wedding and people staring at me is like, I hate that. I don't like people staring at me. I know you're like, but you went on a TV show. But I've always been like so shy, so shy, and very quiet. I constantly in the corner observing. And I think for me it was, you know, I think at the beginning of the show, I did that same thing. I was just very shy and quiet. And then towards the end, it was like I gained a little bit of this confidence. and when I was feeling safe, I was able to essentially speak up and speak my mind and tell people, like, hey, this is wrong, so by the time, and sure, I got voted off on Restaurant Wars, but by the time I did get to Restaurant Wars, it was like, hey, Chris, you do this. Hey, you do this, and unfortunately, when you're speaking up, the judges table's not the place to speak up, because the person who's usually speaking the most at judges table is probably going home.
Yeah.
So halfway through judges table that day, I was like, no one else is talking and I am the only one talking. This is bad.
I really do enjoy watching those people. Everyone on the show is just, the craft is so amazing. The interpersonal relationships, somebody's a jerk and then they redeem themselves. I learn more lessons from that show. I learn lessons about myself and how I interact with my teammates. And we always try and make a little lesson at the end. And it's actually been really amazing, just sort of learning all the different ways that,
I mean, it's you're putting yourself in a high stress situation that no one, I mean, I was one of the very few people that hadn't even done a TV show before that. And so I guess some people were kind of used to like a little bit of the atmosphere, but because it's such a long running show, because there's an arc and you're there for weeks upon weeks, I think you're in this high stress situation and you don't know how you're going to react, and then you just react and you're like, damn it, I gotta go apologize to this person.
You want to talk to them?
I don't know, what should we talk about? I think you kind of learn a lot about yourself and or you don't, or you're just an a-hole, and
some of them don't learn a lot about themselves.
I mean, we all chatted for probably a year after the show, but since then we've all gone our own ways, and I still talk to a few people, but there's certain people I'm like, you know what, we don't need to be in each other's lives. We're good. And that's just the way it is, when it's trauma bonding for sure, to a certain degree. And then after you kind of see people's true colors, you're like, huh, interesting.
Yeah.
Can't believe we trauma bonded, but all right.
I mean, yeah. It's what you do with those lessons, right? And I think that everyone watching that show learns a little bit about themselves, hopefully, if they're doing that kind of editorializing.
Well, and that's, again, I think there's a lot of people who think, you go on this show and you're like, yeah, you've got it made. And I'm like, I worked so hard after the show. For me, it was basically, like, I tell people it was like a snow globe, and I had a little shake up and I realized, I can figure out how to do things and I can figure out how to live my life the way that I want to live it. And, a lot of people just went because it's a competition and there's money. Whereas I, again, very naive, was just thinking, well, it might just be fun, and I go on and I didn't realize what a huge impact it would have on my life, because when I did come back after the show, I literally just flipped everything upside down and, it was kind of like, I'm going to do this business. I got to get out of this really terrible relationship. I got to focus on myself, and be selfish for once, even though it's not selfish, but I have to do the things that make me happy, because quite literally for years I was like a zombie. I didn't do anything. I just worked and like stared at the TV, and that was it. And now I've got, it's kind of amazing what happens when you just go for it. So I think for me, that's kind of when I do have, bad days or days where I just think like, this is where I want my company to go, and these are the products that I want to make, and it just seems so impossible. I kind of just have to like bring myself back down and realize that, I mean, I didn't even know what a co-packer was 2 years ago. And I managed to just, make this business happen and not lose my buddy's money, which is the main thing I was worried about. Was like, am I gonna have to like tell him that I can't pay him back and then just owe him money for the rest of my life? But it's kind of just amazing to. It's been a nice little confidence boost for me. I didn't actually think that I would make it here. But here I am. I mean, for instance, when I moved up to, I didn't have a car when living in San Francisco. There's no need for one. And so when I moved up to the Pacific Northwest, I didn't even buy a normal car. I bought a soccer mom van. I bought a Ford Transit van as a work van, and I told myself one day I will put fish in this van, and then it's just like I never thought it was gonna happen. I was in such a bad place in my life, and then I've put way more fish than needs to go in that van. I still drive it around and look like a soccer mom. But I definitely haul fish in it too, which is great. So yeah, it's just it was like I took these really small steps in my life in the direction I wanted to go in, and I just never jumped off the cliff. And for me, Top Chef was like jumping off the cliff. I was like, I'm either gonna do this or I'm not gonna do this, because if I don't do this right now, it's not gonna happen. This is the best time that I could possibly do this. Pandemic, no pandemic, didn't matter.
You're running your own business. Can you tell me about the experience of opening up the Tiny Fish Company? And we're so fascinated by this new, kind of. It's not new. It's new for sort of the general population, but I mean, I've been a fan of sort of like the European sort of canned fish movement for a couple of years now, and I was really excited to talk to you about like what got you into it and how it's going.
It was kind of one of those random things that I've always loved. I've always loved fish, and basically when I was a kid, and we would. I wanted to eat all of the weird things, it's like you gave me a fish eyeball, I would eat it. I thought it was like so cool to just be so gross and weird. And so I was always a pretty curious eater, I would say. Canned fish, I mean, we had like tuna and canned oysters at my house growing up, but nothing crazy. I really think being kind of in Europe for quite some time was where it just seemed so cool to me to take this ingredient that's so highly perishable, and then to really like honor it, essentially, and make it so that you can eat it and enjoy it years after the fact was just really, really cool to me. There is just such a huge, culture and history behind it when you're talking about European tinned fish. And of course we have some history and some culture around it in the Pacific Northwest and the Northeast, of course, here in the US, but it's just not as rich. I think in America, it's always just been more of this like industrial, commercialized industry where we're trying to just make money, which is, where I am having such a hard time right now. I just want to do it for the love of it, but it's so difficult when you're playing this volume game. But I guess I got into it kind of then, and then when I came back to San Francisco after working in the Basque region, that's when I kind of started getting these like chef jobs, and they always seem to be at kind of smaller restaurants, open kitchen, almost like a bar, very wine centric, and I just thought it would be so cool to. Like I said, I never wanted to open a restaurant, but I just thought it would be so cool to have like a wine bar and canned fish. But what if it was my own canned fish? And Again, being very quiet before the show, I kept all of that to myself. I didn't really tell anyone. So when I did actually decide to make the move up to Portland, when I broke up with my employer and I kind of told her like I want to do this fish thing, she was like, "Where is this even coming from? You've never even said anything about this." And I was like, "Yeah, I know." It's just been in my brain. So I actually, I've had my company for a year and a half. I launched in December of 2021, but I've had my Tiny Fish LLC for 5 years. I bought it when I moved up to the Pacific Northwest, and it was, I kind of had this idea that the one thing that I've always made in restaurants as a chef was pickled anchovies, and people just love them so much. And so that was kind of my idea first, was let's figure out how to do some Spanish style boquerones, and I can sell domestic boquerones because you don't see those anywhere. At least not, you only see it in restaurants. And then, again, it's going through the process of it, realizing that I'm going to have to get fresh anchovies, shipped up from the bay, because in Oregon, all of the anchovies they're separated between bait grade and food grade. Bait grade anchovies is what we have up in Oregon. And the season's just not there. So I essentially went through all of the steps of like doing my own HACCP plan and talking to the health inspector and getting a commissary kitchen. And then, by the time I got there, it was March of 2020. And then the pandemic happened, and I was like, well, I'm not going to work in a commissary kitchen when we all might die in a zombie apocalypse. And also, I'm not going to waste my money on this, because I was doing it with just my money. And then, of course, the show happens, and usually, so all the interviews that are aired are pretty, generally speaking, they're in chronological order. They don't really mess around with that, but I do remember that. So very first interview before the show even the competition even started was when they had asked me what my dream would be, and I said to own a boutique cannery, and I wasn't kidding. But I just didn't think that they would air it, because that was before the competition even started. But they stuck it in, on the surf and turf challenge, and that was, I don't know, I was like, why did I say that? That was so crazy. Why would I say something like that? I'm probably the biggest weirdo to so many people. And I barely watched the show even when I did good, and I never really listened or read anything, podcasts and all the like about it. But Shota actually forced me to listen to this podcast right after that episode, and the guys doing the podcast were like, "That's the coolest answer. I would absolutely invest in that." I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe it's not that weird after all. Maybe I'm not so crazy." And then I just got super lucky. I had a friend, and he was like, "Hey, why are you not doing this thing that you want to do?" And I said, "Because I beating around the bush," and I was like, honestly, it's a passion project. It's expensive. I don't have the money. I don't know what I'm doing. And he was like, "Here, take this money, figure it out." And that's what I did.
First of all, we all have PTSD from the last 2 years, probably. I think
Absolutely.
we're all just struggling to get back to some form of normalcy, and so many of us had these huge setbacks, business wise. So I mean, it's really remarkable to even persevere through those things, given the circumstances. But I just think it's such a unique idea.
Ignorance is bliss, I think. Ignorance is bliss. I also I'm gonna be perfectly honest. My buddy gave me money, and I said, "Cool, okay." So I started looking into canning equipment spaces. I I thought I'm coming at this whole project from like, I'm a chef, I must do everything from start to finish. And, again, just kind of the universe working its magic. And I had a cannery reach out to me and say, hey, do you want to work on some recipe development with us? I'm like, all right, sure. I go up there and I kind of tour the cannery and talk to them. And I was telling them, well, my friend gave me this money and I have to I gotta do something with it. And they kind of started laughing because I was asking them to basically help me figure out equipment and spaces and all that, regulations, licenses, and I'm already getting freaked out because I realized that my buddy gave me $100,000. I was like, I need $5 million. So I'm talking to the cannery and they were like, you can just do all your R&D here and then we can manufacture it for you. You just you get all the raw materials and we'll put it in cans and we'll cook it for you, man. And I was like, huh, I didn't know that was an option. So then the wide world of co-packing and manufacturing made its entrance into my life. And now I have basically been giving myself, from that moment on, it was a crash course in literally everything. It's been a crash course in figuring out how to work with a manufacturer. It's been a crash course in realizing that I entered into this world of what I thought was going to be a bunch of food people and like-minded people just trying to put nutritious, delicious things on store shelves, realizing that no one cares. No one's a food person. It's business people, it's marketing people. They don't care what's inside the package. They care how it looks and they care how much money they're making. And you can write sustainable 5 million times on your package and not have to prove anything. And it's definitely been really, really hard to try and do things the right way and do things the way that I know that they should be done, and work with local fishermen and work really close, harvest my fish close to the manufacturer and use my recipes as opposed to just, rebranding fish from Europe, which is what a lot of companies do. And it's been a little bit. Some days I'm like, yeah, I'm actually really doing something different. And then there's other days where I think, but do people even notice that I'm what I'm going through and how much money essentially I'm not making to give you something that's been domestically produced and something that is, quite honestly, just a little bit better for the environment. I think what I kind of was seeing was all of these, food coming from here, going over here, and then going up here, and then being manufactured here, and then going to you over here, and then to this person over here. And it's, by the time you have that sustainable, this is great for the environment food in your hand, how great for the environment is it after it's traveled around the world 2 or 3 times? The carbon footprint on that is massive. And so for me, it was, I didn't really think about it in a marketing way. Again, I just thought of, I can only be me. And I've realized that, I guess, also through the show. And being me means not doing the same things that everyone else is doing. Would I ever just put tuna in a can and that's it? Absolutely not.
I think it's the CEO of some enormous food company, but he has this quote that I read in the Wall Street Journal that says, "It's expensive to be nice to chickens." And I printed that out and stuck it on my wall because, we think about this all the time. It would be a lot more lucrative to be a little evil or maybe just more careless.
Absolutely.
But it's important to us that we're not that we like what we do and we like the place that we work and we like the company that we've built. And so you take it in the chin or in the wallet,
Yeah.
to not make those cuts. And I think that we, absolutely, we all need people like you that are literally saying, I'm not going to compromise with quality and the message that I'm sending, and still find a way to make it lucrative. And I think people will eventually start getting behind that. I know that it does feel like you're sort of shouting into the abyss, but
It
there's people
is,
all over the
yes.
world that really want to eat sustainable food because we're all
It is.
hypocrites and we're all trying to not be, right?
100%. Yeah, and as I tell people all the time too, I'm like, listen, I know that just by starting a business, I've, increased my carbon footprint tenfold. I'm not stupid, but I also, within that, it's like, I know I've never been more tired and stressed, and I don't know what days are like, and from day to day I try to plan it out, and I have worked super super hard in the last couple years to side hustle essentially and not pay myself. I invest everything back in the company, and I've basically taken my initial investment and almost tripled it in a year and a half. And I've only been able to do that because I'm not taking payouts, and I'm not doing crazy things. I do private dinners, I do consulting gigs, and I'm, finally at this point where I am very much burnt out, and I'm like, okay, I need to really focus on the business, or I'm just gonna stay at this level, or do I want to do something more? So it's figuring out now how to kind of expand on this idea, and possibly, again, I'm only going to be me, and I don't want to start just rebranding fish from Europe or fish from, Alaska or wherever. That's not my recipe, because it just doesn't seem right to me, to put my name on someone else's intellectual property. So I am now I'm thinking about kind of different sustainable arenas that we can work within. Seaweed's incredible. It's really, really good for you. It's really healthy. We have an abundance of kelp, of course, on the Oregon coast.
Can you tell me, like, who is your customer? Are you straight to consumer? Are you selling to chains? Like, what is your ideal your ideal customer?
So I kind of do everything. I have quite a few wholesale accounts. I'm in New Seasons. I'm in Market of Choice in the Pacific Northwest. I'm in a smaller grocery chain in Cleveland and Chicago, and lots of independent retailers throughout the nation. I also sell quite a bit online. TikTok is a very strange place, and
Oh, wow.
I don't necessarily have to post any videos per se, but if someone does a review of my product on TikTok or mentions it, I can oftentimes tell because my phone just starts going haywire. Um,
That's fantastic.
yeah, it's weird. It's definitely weird.
Yeah.
Um, so that makes me feel good, and obviously, I'm not silly. I know that the price point on my food or on my products are they're a little bit higher, but again, and for me, I try to use social media as more of this way to educate consumers and say, hey, this is why it's a little bit more expensive. Because I really am trying to keep everything domestic, and I'm really trying to keep everything as local as possible, to where, it's being basically where the fish is harvested, it's getting manufactured right in the middle of Northern California up to Alaska. And so that's just really important to me as a chef, as like not, again, the carbon footprint on freight, but also just not mishandling the fish and having it frozen for, super hard frozen so it can cold ship. Like, I want it to be as fresh as possible and as close to the source as possible. And it means a lot to me to be able to write on the package that's, someone's in Maine, goes to their small little grocery store and can pick up my package and say, oh, that's cool. This lady can tell me the name of the boat that her fish in a can was caught on, and it's still a high volume ish manufactured product, but to be able to still do that, I think it says, well, it's a lot of work. Let me tell you, it's a lot of work,
Yeah.
and you know, like I said, it costs money to be nice to chickens, I guess. Yeah, it costs money to be nice. Costs money to be nice to fish, and it costs money to manufacture in the U.S. And what a lot of people don't know too is, especially in the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of these abandoned towns, if you will, in British Columbia, Washington, Alaska. They're abandoned because they're old canneries, and the whole industry it's a dying industry. It really, really is. So I work with a family-run cannery. It's definitely, there's some issues that happen all the time, and consistency issues, but to me, like I said, it's more important that it's called Tiny Fish Go for a reason, and it's not because I use tiny fish like most people think. It's because it's small, and I think that's the whole idea is being resourceful, using what you need, not having, again, we live in this consumerist society where there's just abundance and overconsumption. And for me, it's balance. I don't want to give you a six ounce can of fish, because you shouldn't be eating 6 ounces of fish. You should just eat the 3.5 ounces of fish, because that's the reason that we're in this predicament with the ocean, and we've overfished the oceans. And again, that's why I focus on these species that maybe you don't usually find in cans. And what does that mean for me? That means, one, a lot of R&D, and two, introducing people to different textures. A lot of people are into that, so my consumer has to be open and adventurous and curious and willing to try something a little bit different, and willing, I have a fish and soy sauce, and to me, I go into, H Mart, Uwajimaya, any Asian grocery, pick out a can of fish, open it up, and go, whoa, this is so cool. And I don't think, well, I'm going to just make a toast or put it on crackers. I'm like, wow, I'm going to put this on rice. And for me, it was this huge, brain bending moment where I thought, okay, there's a whole continent of people that does tin fish in a different way. I think that it would be so cool to introduce people to this way of doing it. But again, unfortunately, some people get it, some people just don't.
One of the things that you said earlier, you're like, you said, I didn't want to feel selfish. I selfishly started this business. And it's so remarkable that, like, we do feel more selfish somehow starting our own business and going into this passion project, when somehow it's less selfish to just sort of slave away at some position that doesn't fulfill you. And what a weird perception that is, that we all feel that way at times, and you've been able to sort of yank yourself out of that weird ecosystem and start your own business.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's also, I think as a chef of a restaurant, I've always, and I know so many people who are very similar to me, where I think it's almost, you take on this, maternal or paternal role in the kitchen. And so for me, it was always, if my cook didn't feel well or wanted to go back home to see their parents, I would work extra so they could do that. But then I would never leave, because then I would put someone out by having to work more too. And I think it's again, is it a personality trait that, us as chefs are just attracted to this job because we have this personality trait, or is this a culture, in the restaurant industry that's just been bred over decades? I'm not really sure, it's like what came first, the chicken or the egg? But I do really think that, especially professional chefs, there is a certain personality type that is absolutely attracted to the kitchen. I think even more for me, on now it's a little bit more celebrity driven and whatnot, but I think that kind of weeds out the people who aren't meant for the industry pretty quickly because it's pretty brutal. But, again, like I said, I was always quiet. I was always sitting in the corner. I've always been very observant of life. And so for me, working in a kitchen was perfect because I could go in, work super, super hard, and not have to like be the face. So once I made that move and was the chef and was the face, that's when I started. Yeah, sure, I won awards, absolutely, but I also it took my anxiety way up. Way up. And obviously now I have a business, so I am a face, the face of the business. But I think it's been a little bit better to, I'm able to now see the value, I guess, in having my own business, one, because I am the procurer of the money, whether that be personally or professionally, I am just making this happen. And there is a very, very powerful feeling that you get from that, in just making, I pay my own health insurance, that there's just something really empowering about that. And I don't want to give that up. I think I would rather work super hard, more hard than I do in restaurants, than to work for someone. And, it's not for everyone. I know a lot of people who tried to have their own restaurants, to try to do their own thing, whatever it was, and they're like, you know what? I just want to collect a paycheck from someone else. I want to live my life and do this thing, but again, I know that I have an obsessive personality. I know that, I've always been very hyper-focused. When I'm into something, I'm really, really into something. And so for me, this, life of being an entrepreneur, if that's what you want to call it, it just fits for me because I can obsess all I want and I don't have anyone telling me otherwise.
And we're so glad that you do because, you're going to inspire other people as well. I mean, there's people taking their own reins and doing what you've done. And,
Absolutely.
And it's inspiring. I think it's inspiring to me for sure, and the rest of us for sure.
If I can kind of encourage other food service professionals, hey, you don't need to, it's not just about restaurants. There's plenty of food operations, in this industry, be them in, the product sector or R&D or, I don't know, working for institutional food service, there's different ways to work with food, and you don't just have to work in a restaurant because that doesn't work for everyone. And that definitely just didn't work for me.
When you're working in a restaurant, you're struggling, a lot of times I think society kind of, urges us to just put our heads down and bear, grin and bear it, right?
Grin and bear it.
And it could actually be the environment and not actually you not being able to hack it. And being able to pivot like you did and knowing when that time has come is really important for everyone to sort of watch for.
Yeah, it's all. I think there's such a huge, kind of societal shift in paying attention to your mind as much as your body, and helping your brain out, and whether that be talking to someone or whether that be eating better, exercising, whatever it is, meditating, and I think that's incredible, and it's great, and sometimes that's what I needed, and apparently I had to go on a silly reality TV show to get that across to myself. I think that I took a very strange detour for my mental health. Most people just, talk to a counselor. Not me. It's like, what sounds great? Just go on a reality show.
We're glad you did. Sara, this has been fantastic. I've already held on to you for too long, but it was just wonderful to meet you, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
How confident are you in executing 65 sausages?